Hello from the National Farm Machinery Show. I'm visiting with FMC and I have with me Drake Copeland. Drake, what do you do for the company?
So I'm a tech service manager. I cover Michigan, Ohio, and Northeast Indiana.
We want to talk about weeds. I know, it's kind of surprising, right? But let's talk about things like pre-emergence, residuals, herbicides, and how important those are in today's weed control program.
Yeah, so with the weed populations we have today, there's a lot of tough biotypes that we have to control, and it's a system of things that we have to do. But pre-herbicides is essential to have to get your crop off to a clean start as far as the field and not having that early weed competition.
Yeah. So when growers use a reduced herbicide pre-emergence, for example, on rates, what are is that good, bad, or if it's not good, what are the dangers in that?
Yeah, so when we look at a pre-emergence herbicide applications, it's an investment to make during your year. And if you're going out and applying half that rate, you're actually exposing those weed seeds to a sublethal dose. And what that'll do is, yeah, it may control some of them, but a lot of the more tolerant weeds are going to survive that application and go on to reproduce for next year. And then you have a generation of that weed that's actually more tolerant to that pre-emergence herbicide.
So I can guess, but tell us what your recommendation is for growers that are looking for this type of program and what they should do.
Yeah, so with a residual program, you want to have a pre-emergence herbicide. Obviously, based on your soil type, apply at least the 1X rate that we have on the label. It's there for a reason. But the idea is we want to overlap residuals. So we apply that pre-emerge, we have a rate of that residual in the weed seed germination zone. Over time, that's going to degrade. So that's when we come in on that first early post application, include a residual herbicide and get that residual back up to where it's controlling those weeds.
Let's go back to the weeds for a minute. I understand that size matters, and why does it?
Yeah, so the idea behind that is the rates that we put on the labels are for weeds that we can control that are 3 inches tall. Say, for example, if you go out and try to control that same weed that's 8 inches tall. With that weed being that size, that's actually, and you're applying that 1X rate for a 3-inch weed, you're actually exposing it to a sublethal dose. So it's not going to be high enough to actually control that weed. Just like I mentioned earlier, that weed will go on to reproduce and you'll develop resistance.
So what are the most important things that growers can do to slow the growth of weeds or the problem in their fields?
Yeah, so the main thing is it depends on the weed species you have, but you've got to integrate other things besides a herbicide. Like Matthew's mentioned, we've solely focused on herbicides. There's things you can do like row spacing, rotating crops every year, or introducing a cover crop into your system. Those are all things that can suppress weeds, and not only that, it's going to help reduce that selection pressure on those herbicides that we've talked about today.
So let's say they've got a problem with PPO resistance, for example, herbicide resistance. Then what should they do in order to help overcome that?
Yeah, so based on the research that we've done, a lot of these populations, it depends on how resistant they are. So you could have a field that's maybe 60% resistant to PPO herbicides. What that means is we don't need to take that PPO herbicide out of the system. We can actually control those other susceptible weeds and also include another mode of action to control that PPO resistant biotype within that population.
And so before we close, we hear the term seed bank, for example. How important is that in the scheme of this?
Yeah, so the soil seed bank is obviously when you have an end of the year escape that goes on to produce seed. The idea behind it is to not let that happen, and over time we'll reduce that seed bank. But a lot of these problem weeds we have now, like Palmer amaranth and water hemp, they're small seeded, they last in the soil seed bank. There's been research 3 to 5 years, so if you can incorporate that practice into your farm, over time you will deplete that seed soil bank. Other things you may have to watch out for though, what are your neighbors doing? Are you in a spot where there will be some trash thrown that may have seed? Those are things that you have to be aware of so we can totally take care of that problem.
Does that get into things like just the cultural practices that you use in addition to that?
Yeah, so if we're harvesting the field in the fall and you've got some escapes, it may not be a bad idea to blow off a piece of equipment, your combine, make sure it's clean. Try to those are really small seeds, but get the ones that you can. That way you can reduce that from happening, that chance.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. We've been visiting here with FMC at the National Farm Machinery Show. I'm Chuck Zimmerman reporting.